Debate of Politicon. We have some amazing colleges with us again. We have Pepperdine, we have UCLA, and we have University of VERNE and USC. Sorry, it's been a long day, lots of things. Anyway, let's get started. I will turn it over to our excellent judge, entertainment producer and former campaign manager, Patrick Millsaps.
So I apologize in advance for anything I messed you up on. So thank you. My name is Patrick Millsaps, and I'll be your chair for the debate. Joining me on the judging panel are author Jim DeFelice and former congressional candidate Clay Aiken. Opening for the government, we have the Prime Minister Christian Hagan from USC. And opening for the opposition, as the opposition leader, we will have Austin from UCLA. Joining the government in this case as the Deputy Prime Minister is Jake Amble from Pepperdine, with the Deputy Opposition Leader Camden Marquin from University of Laverne rebutting. They will be followed by Abtin Hedari from USC, making the case as a member of government, and Vishal Tumalov from UCLA responding as a member of the opposition. Then summarizing the government side, we have the elect Jan from Pepperdine. Summarizing the opposition side will be Brittany Boyko from the University of Louisville. Before we begin, please remember teams have been assigned the topic and side for the debate. Their argument should not be interpreted as an endorsement of the position by the debaters or the institutions they represent. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now call this House to order on the motion that this House believes that having held elected office should be a requirement for the presidential candidates. This House believes that having held elected office should be a requirement of presidential candidates. I invite the Prime Minister to open the case for the government bid.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I would like to thank Politicon for having us and being able to hold this event for us as college students to get this experience, to be able to talk to everyone about current political issues that we all face. I would like to thank our colleagues who we're about to engage with for a very reasonable discussion about a very pertinent issue in this coming election. Because let's face it, elections aren't what they used to be, and thanks to lightning-fast communication and social media, they will never be the same way again. The political landscape in America has always been evolving, but in 2015, we are seeing people enter the mainstream presidential race from unprecedented backgrounds, whether they be CEO, neurosurgeons, Harvard professors, and even rappers have presidential ambitions. As much materials as this may provide for pundits and sketch comedy shows, these changes have drastic effects on the presidential nomination process. Thus, this House believes that having held elected office should be a requirement of presidential candidates. First, we would like to define the terms of the debate. An elected office is a person who has a political public official by virtue of an election. These come at 3 different levels, whether it be the federal, state, and local. For the purposes of our discussion, we opt out to limit elected officials to those at federal and state levels, and specifically at the state level, governors and members of state legislators and mayors of major cities. Our reasoning to exclude local offices is that municipalities lack the same level of scope that provide the necessary experience to handle presidential office. One of our major reasons why candidates should be required to have previously held elected office is ultimately experience. The most powerful position in the world. Yes.
Would you not say that running an NGO in a developing country or being appointed to chair the Federal Reserve is equal amounts of experience that would be valued in the presidency? Both of those positions do not require you to be elected, sir.
That is not the same as putting troops on the ground, sending troops into war to be killed, creating funding that will ultimately determine the lives of the homeless and other people that are structurally facing systematic racism and other major categorical issues, and I'll answer that one later. Anyway, why candidates should be required to have previously held offices experience the most powerful position in the world is categorically unlike any other position. The litany of roles and obligations that the president must fulfill means that candidates have to be ready to adopt the well-being of an entire nation. Federal and state positions act as training grounds for potential candidates to receive knowledge of the political process, experience with the policymaking, and interpersonal connection with other politicians. Without elected office experience, candidates lack the knowledge, tool sets, and established connections to operate autonomously as a president. They have to rely on the committees, assemblages, and expertise of other people's positions. This reduces the presidency from a strong leader to a puppet figure for other obscured actors. One of the reasonable accounts of this is Donald Trump's continuous insistence on getting the people to do work. A president without prior elected office experience is more reliant on those external forces, and the fact that the only actual political legislation that he's articulated is the tax reform option that he released about 2 weeks ago that had about 500 advisors created for him, and it still isn't fairly articulated. He doesn't even have a sense of what that actually accounts for. The same with Ben Carson's political ineptitude, the fact that he didn't even know what a debt ceiling was, and we're expected to consider him a legitimate candidate for this type of position. Also, in terms of the way in which the presidential candidacy is publicized in media.
Now, although we agree that not every person is a good candidate for president, don't you think that the virtue of allowing any person who the public feels fit to run for president be allowed as the president?
What do you find as being fit, though? That is what we're considering in this election. What is actually fit? And as I already articulated, a lot of the reasonable positions that you have to have as the presidency has to consider a lot of different options that is not relatable in other positions, i.e. war, commander-in-chief of the nation. And also, elections get taken less seriously as they get co-opted by sensationalist media coverages that work to exploit the representation of these issues. The need for headlighting comes to the forefront of the political discussion and becomes the way that candidates and previously non-elected officials construct their platforms, and that ultimately funnels the discourses into superficial conversations that mean nothing and leave no end result and does not allow for a holistic view of the presidential race and skews the way in which the American public can conceptualize their choices and voice the issues, because they ultimately end up pushing back the conversations and not actually articulating the way in which they're actually going to run the country or predominantly face these issues. And that ultimately leaves nothing for the viewers and the audience to actually watch and debate about. For example, the second debate, Donald Trump versus Carly Fiorina, which resulted in a debate of personal backgrounds, public persona, other different factors that did not pertain to the actual issue. And even the moderator, Chris Christie, even articulated that everything that they were saying had absolutely nothing to do with the discussion at this moment. And in elected office, you are in charge of people that ultimately don't like you. You have to be in charge of people that don't hold the same viewpoints as you. For example, when Ben Carson says that taxes passed on biblical taxing doesn't take into account the other factors that the American public values, and without that same consideration, we ultimately create a reality show rather than actual political debate. An issue which creates an issue in the diplomatic spectrum. Even candidates who do not agree with certain of these issues, for example, when Carly Fiorina, Donald Trump, and Ben Carson faced the issue about Iran, they said their first day they would rip up the treaty, not at this moment. They would rip up the treaty with Iran their first day, but even other candidates such as John Kesh and Bush, even though they do not agree with the legislation with Iran, they understand the political nuances that without taking into retrospect the hegemonic view of the presidency and the way in which we're articulated in reference to other political viewpoints, ultimately they will create legislation that will be problematic to the American public. And in terms of like the media perspective, if we don't take into account, ultimately it's going to create a capitalistic sort of viewpoint in the fact that having previously elected officials as a policy gets money out of politics comparatively. Election office requirements become more egalitarian because it ultimately levels the playing field. Without that requirement, the presidential candidacy becomes a battle between paychecks. Any individual who can fund for their election and campaign becomes a likely competitor that monopolizes the way in which the race is structured. We are already gearing towards a normalized discourse of having billion-dollar elections, so anybody can ultimately fund at that level can be considered a liable option, i.e. when Kanye West announced that he's going to be running for presidency, even though it's like a joke, it's still ultimately considered viable because he has the money to do it. Waka Flocka Flame actually has a campaign. And ultimately, those are the types of presidencies that we're having and the type of discourses that we're perpetuating.
I thank the Prime Minister very much for his remarks, and now to open the case for the opposition bench, I call upon the Leader of the Opposition.
We believe that the true measure of a president is not the titles he has on his resume, but the changes he can make, the legacy that he can leave behind. We do not believe that just because a president or a person has held an office before, does that mean anything as to what he will be able to do as president of the United States. To prove this, we look at one of the best presidents we've ever had, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Ike, who was a five-star general of the United States, who helped to solve the North Korean conflict peacefully, who balanced the budget 3 times, and was one of the sole reasons that we were able to facilitate the civil rights movement. Yes, maybe he did not hold a previously held elected office, but he was still a great president. And although we believe that a lot of people who do run, who were not elected before, are not good candidates, that does not mean that we should exclude all candidates altogether. That is the beauty of democracy, because the people will be able to decide who are the poor candidates, not us. Now, first we'd like to go on and refute some of the arguments that have come out of the government side. And then, so now the first point is that, well, we need someone who's held an elected office, because otherwise, they wouldn't have had practice putting boots on the ground or doing anything like this. And we ask you, when has a mayor, when has a governor, when has even a senator ever put boots on the ground? Yes, there are a lot of things that he will have to do as president that is new to them, but that is the job of president. And that is why there are advisors. Now, they go on and they say that the problem with a previously non-elected official is that they're going to be reliant on advisors. And we believe that this is non-exclusive, because that is the beauty of the position as president. It is not an autocracy. It is not one man dictating the future of this country, but a man who picks out smart advisors who can help him to lead in all areas. Yes?
Yeah, so when we're talking about smart advising and what we can do, so you're talking about senators do not have the ability to position troops on ground. Don't you think the political environment in which it creates to be a senator in the first place allows for better decisions if you go on to be a president, which means you have an elected office to act as a precedent for how you will create your responses in the future versus its alternative of not having any elected office?
Well, actually, we think it's actually quite the opposite. We think that the precedent that has been set by current politicians is exactly the problem, and that is why we need to get some new faces. That is going to be both our third and our fourth contention, and we'll get to that now. So now we move on to our own contentions. Basically, throughout our case, we're going to give you 4 arguments as to why you must vote for the opposition side. The first is that people have the right to choose whoever they want as president. That's the beauty of democracy. The second is that the skills of a politician are not exclusive just to career politicians. The third is that in this new generation, which they talked about, we need politicians with new skills. And the fourth, which will be covered by my partner, is that there's currently gridlock, and one of the best ways that we can stop it is by bringing in new faces. Now we go back to the first choice, which is that people have the right to choose who they want as president. We agree that oftentimes these people, like Kanye West, like Waka Flocka Flame, maybe they're not going to be the best politicians. But if the people want him to be president of the United States, then you know what? That's what happens, because that is how democracy works. It is a government by the people, for the people. And that is why, whatever you may say about Trump, about Fiorina, about Carson, if the people are keeping them in the running, if the people are making them the front runners, then that is who should be a presidential candidate. Because the government is not decided by a select few who think they know better. It is decided by the majority of people who are giving their opinions. Additionally, we've seen that... we've seen the ABC News poll found that Congress is currently disapproved of by 72% of Americans, and that 60% think that the nation's on the wrong track. If the people think the problem is current politicians, then we think the people have the right to change who they are electing. We think the people have the right to choose someone other than a career politician, not at this time. Now we go on to the second contention we have, which is the non-exclusivity of the skills of a politician. Now, although we agree that if you are a previously elected official, you may have some experience in politics. Maybe you know how to play the field a little bit. But what we also believe is that being a politician does not require any specific skill that a normal person could not have. It's not a special degree, it's not a special training. All it is the ability to lead people, is the ability to have good ideas, and the ability to actually convince people that you know what you're doing, to help the nation as a whole. And that is something that can be held by any person of any walks of life. Do you disagree?
Yeah, clearly. I think you, in fact, would disagree that no ordinary person with no background in politics can make the decision of when to pull in troops when it is necessary. I don't think that you would actually agree, sir, that that is a good thing to do, or that it does not require any sort of established precedent that means like anybody can make a politically wise decision.
Well, if your argument is that I would not be a good candidate for president, then you'd be correct.
That's
But
not
if the
what I
nation
said,
believes
actually.
that you are the argument for, that I am the best candidate for president, and that I have the intelligence to elect a general, to pick someone in as my Secretary of Defense that can help me to pick the best strategy, then I deserve to be president of the United States, because that is the will of the people, and that is what we are forced to participate. So thank you. Now, as we were going back to our point of the non-exclusivity of skills, oftentimes people who are not career politicians have the same skills and can do them even better. We look at three of our most prominent presidents: Taft, Herbert Hoover, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, as I mentioned in my intro, all of which were three of our best presidents and never held elected office. They had other skills. For example, Herbert Hoover was, he'd served at many things, he was the Solicitor General. Taft was the Solicitor General. Herbert Hoover was the president of the Secretary of the Economy, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, as I listed, was a 5-star general. Sorry for that. Now, what we have shown is that just because you're not a career politician does not mean you do not have skills that can help you to navigate our country through the incredibly difficult times that we're going through the complex times that we're going through in this nation. Sometimes you need someone with niche skills, even if those skills are not the career politician, because that is something that anyone can have. No, thank you. Now we go on to our third point that I'm going to talk about in this speech, is that, as they stated, we're in a new generation. It has been something that we have never seen before in these elections. We now have news sources like Twitter, like HuffPost, that are bringing news right to the people in their own homes in an instant. What we need is not politicians who are stuck in their old ways about how we do things, but we need people who are ready to adapt to the 21st century, who are ready to play to the young people. Since young voter turnout is at an all-time low, what we need to see is we need to have a reinvigoration of the election system, something that we see around college campuses throughout the world. The way that we do this is by getting politicians that actually represent what the people want, not just what they've done in the past. We believe that we must go strictly with what the people want as government, and we do not believe that being a previous politician, being in a previous elected office, has nothing to do with what the people want. If they decide in the end to vote for someone new, we believe we should support that decision, because that is how we make meaningful change, and that is how we continue our democratic nation. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister very much for his remarks. Hang on one second. Okay. Before you speak, would you tell us your name before you do?
I'm Upton Nader.
All right, thank you. So I thank the opposition leader very much for his remarks. The House is now pleased to recognize the Deputy Prime Minister.
In elected office, particularly that of the presidency, you are not only in charge of the people that like you, but those that don't. The presidency is not just a position of power, it's the highest form of public service. And one of the pitfalls of democracy is the possibility of a tyranny of the majority, where the interests of the majority are placed above minority groups to the point of total exclusion. This leads to the failure of democratic institutions. The reason this is relevant to our discussion today is because there is a tendency in popular discourse today around the presidency to conceptualize the position as merely a position of power. We hear this in the rhetoric of Donald Trump and Fiorino, or particularly Trump, when he compares being a president to a CEO, making people who disagree with him listen to him because he'll make them respect him, even if they disagree. The reality is that the presidency is a unique leadership position, uncomparable to that of a CEO, an NGO, or really anything else. A presidential candidate unable to understand the importance of being a public servant will necessarily refuse to understand the importance of oppositional views. Even with the heavily partisan trends we are seeing in today's legislature, this is an issue. And advocating for elected office requirements is an affirmation of the presidency as a form of public service, because it acknowledges the former public service and acknowledges that former public service is an integral component of the presidency itself, not at this moment. This ensures an understanding of the role of the president as a public service, as opposed to a shiny status symbol, a framing which guarantees that candidates are not power hungry. Our opposition makes a lot of interesting points, but and particularly by referring to candidates like Taft and Eisenhower. But the things that they don't understand is what my partner said in the beginning of the speech. The reality is the political landscape is changing because of mass communication and the cult of celebrity. What we're seeing with a lot of these non-elected official candidates is not that they're from military backgrounds. It's not that they're from backgrounds of like some other political importance. They're usually celebrities, usually major CEOs who make inflammatory views and have high profiles and act as reality figures. In fact, Trump even acknowledges in his speech. This means we need to take into account the way that social media and popular discourses of celebrity are actually affecting our understanding of politics. Yes?
All of this inherently assumes that if this unqualified candidate makes the ballot, I'm going to make the wrong choice when I vote. Shame. Every American has a right to determine what vote is for them. And if I want a ballsy president like Trump, I have that right to vote him in.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you there. I'm just saying that there are certain institutional and structural issues that are coming about because of changes in popular discourse and mass media that we need to at least acknowledge or have a discussion of, which is why we're here today. And particularly this is true in the diplomatic sphere. Fiorina, Trump, and Carson have gone on record saying that they would tear up a treaty with Iran in their first day in office. And Jeb Bush and John Cage went on record calling this politically disastrous and unreasonable, even though they disagree with the Iran treaty as a whole. This means that there's at least a level of nuance that needs to go into being a diplomatic leader of America that, frankly, candidates who don't have an elected office background often lack because they lack the political background, the political office. They're willing to make really extreme and really rash moves for the sake of getting up voters and rallying bases or extremes that often don't translate to realistic political action. Because of this, the experience acting in Congress or dealing with interstate relations acts as a democratic training ground where candidates understand to deliberately effectively with leaders of oppositional entities. We're not saying that these candidates should not be allowed to run for presidency. We're just saying that they should have to go through other avenues of public office in order to get there. That's what Arnold Schwarzenegger did. That's what Ronald Reagan did. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, if he wanted to run for presidency, he could because he was a governor of California. What we're saying is that there needs to be at least a level of experience so that we can know that these politicians are effective and they're not just winning based off the celebrity status and the theory around them. Not right now, please. These candidates, and another thing is that these candidates tend to view the presidency as an organizational institution, and they view the leadership as who wins the presidency. It will radically restructure the government like they would a corporation or organization. But the idea of changing one president to the next means abandoning everything before is completely flawed and also devalues the power of the presidency as a whole. The reality is a president has to adopt and take care of the issues and the platforms and policies of the presidents before them. That's what Obama did with Bush. Obama didn't just abandon everything Bush did. He took on Bush's obligations, took on Bush's policies, and found ways to challenge them and push them through, but still keep them there. The reality is only other public officials have this understanding of political nuance, or at least are able to verbalize this. Where we've seen a lot of these other candidates, we are hearing people like, to use an extreme example, Waka Flocka talk about enacting policy changes that have no precedent, no base. And the thing is, this is actually getting a lot of attention from young people on social media. Because the reality is that there is a lack of understanding of the actual nuance and depth of the political system, which facilitates people buying into these very rash and very extreme ideas that aren't based in reality. Yeah.
Yes, who are you to say what is the proper diplomatic move? Isn't the basic tenet of a democracy that the people's opinion is what we enact?
I'm not saying one form of diplomatic standpoint is qualitatively better than the next. I'm just saying that having experience in that field is probably a good litmus test for what candidates are actually able to be effective leaders, which is, I think, is a pretty reasonable state. And on the last point, there's a thing that our opposition is completely missing, and that's the failure of the commons. In a supposedly open, unregulated space, those with the most resources win out. And the thing is, all this discourse of radical democracy is really nice, but the thing in the abstract, but the thing is, it fails in reality because what we're seeing is that the average person who has like very sound political platforms is not getting visibility. Those with money are. Those with standpoint and celebrity status are. The thing is, these requirements that we're acting are actually comparatively more egalitarian because it makes sure that money is kept out of politics and that we have equal visibility for candidates because they will have had public office. It's easier to know where a candidate comes from and look at them as an equal when you have seen them before in a position of public office, or you've seen them or heard them in the news and heard about what they've enacted. The thing is, when we don't have this, what happens is that the candidates who get who have the most money, who are the most inflammatory, who say the most controversial things, get the most media coverage. It's a failure of the commons. And this means that everyone comparatively loses because the other people are crowded out. So in this way, having these restrictions is actually comparatively more egalitarian. And thus, I urge you to vote in our favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, very much for his remarks. And now to continue the case for the opposition, please recognize the Deputy Leader of the opposition, and if you would identify yourself for the judges. Give us your name.
My name is Vishal Punal. So, ladies and gentlemen, we see side government here repeatedly talking about public service and how it is important, and therefore holding elected office is their only metric for public service. As mentioned in a POI and as mentioned by my partner already, if holding a five-star general's position, or if holding the position of a solicitor general, or if holding any other appointed office is not public service, then what exactly is? Because they think being a career politician is actually a form of public service, but in fact, given that most people in this country do not believe that career politicians are working to their benefit, that they are in fact working to their own advantages, and frankly are doing a disservice to this nation, we think that it is up to the people's prerogative to choose who they want to be represented by. So they talk about this cult of celebrity and changes in political discourse, and that is why, because these are new times, we must ensure that, or we must tell people who they have to choose from. We must restrict the spectrum of candidates available to the people because they don't know who to choose to represent them. First of all, that's the wrong premise. People are by and large aware enough of what's happening in the country, or at least know what they want from their presidential candidate. If someone outside the political sphere is receiving attention, as let's say Donald Trump or Kanye West or any other person seeking that office, it is because people are completely and utterly dissatisfied by what is currently happening in the capital. And this cult of celebrity idea and changes in political discourse, yes, this is an age of social media where every opinion has the same weightage as anyone else's. We're no longer living in an era where the media tells you to choose from this certain set of politicians, and the media tells you who's correct and who's not, and therefore you have to abide by that opinion. Everyone's opinion matters, and that is what a true democracy actually is supposed to espouse. And that is only possible when you do not place any restrictions on political candidates. Again, ladies and gentlemen, they also keep assuming that simply because someone is running for office, he or she will definitely also occupy that office, and therefore will lead to this disastrous policy or diplomatic inefficiency. First of all, they're only running. Running means they're exposed to all sorts of media attention and other forms of attention from the public, which also means their deficiencies are exposed in this campaign, which means the people can therefore in a much better manner assess who the correct candidate for them is. And they keep talking about training grounds and this idea of interpersonal relations with other politicians and how that is important. Yes, they're being indoctrinated into this system of political career where they tend to be more partisan, where they tend to, in fact, cause political gridlock, where they tend to not reach compromises with each other, and that is something we do not want in our political atmosphere. So, they talk about majoritarianism and democratic tyranny. First of all, that is not exclusive to to our side of the debate. In fact, it is very well possible for someone who has an elected office to even win from a majoritarian tendency or a majoritarian wave and continue to enact policies that pander to the majority. So that can happen with both systems, and that is a bullet we're willing to bite, but we do not believe we have to restrict the spectrum of political candidates available to people. But you seem to disagree.
I want to point back to your point about people should be represented by who they want to be represented. I don't understand why that is mutually exclusive with what the government bench has argued so far.
Because you are telling people now that those candidates who haven't held political office are not fit for occupying the office of the president. That by in itself means you are telling people who's right and who's wrong to run for president. That is something that we do not believe is the correct course for a democratic country. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, they talk about these superficial conversations or following the advice of experts. Something that my partner already brought up is the idea that even if he's a politician or if he's not a career politician, they tend to follow the advice of experts. Usually you will find that most political leaders, including our current president, follow the advice of tens of different experts belonging to a wide array of fields. They tend to have their policies drafted by the experts, and they simply present them to the public or to Congress or to any platform. Something that any person who who may not have had political experience can do. And given that any of those advantages of having held public office are not necessarily, first of all, advantages and can actually work to the disadvantage of the office, and given that we can actually gain more from having fresher faces in the political sphere, we believe that their side falls. But let me move on to my constructive point, and that is of political gridlock. As I mentioned already, it is a tendency of a career politician to in fact be more partisan, to in fact not reach a compromise because they're pandering to their own bases of liberal voters or conservative voters, and therefore we see the highest levels of political gridlock that have ever been witnessed in an American scenario. Something that may not necessarily, does not necessarily have to happen when you have someone from outside this realm. Would you seem to disagree?
Yeah, isn't it clear that Trump, Fiorina, and Carson are way more politically partisan than even like Bush or Cage?
First of all, the very idea of Trump, Fiorina, or Carson being able to lead the Republican presidential race is indicative enough that people want someone from outside the political sphere to run for president. Second of all, if they're conservative and if they're pandering to a certain section of the population, that means that the majority doesn't necessarily have to support them. That means they may not necessarily win elections. But the opportunity for them to run for presidency holds much greater precedence, holds much greater value than the very fact that they will become president or they will enact disastrous policy. So, coming back to my point of political gridlock, ladies and gentlemen, the idea that a career politician is most certainly better than anyone else to occupy the greatest office, or the idea that a mayor or a governor has had experience in deploying troops or sending boots on the ground or making financial decisions that may impact a country is just as facile as presuming that people who have not had experience cannot make those decisions for their nation. Given that we live in a democracy that is by, of, and for the people, and given that any candidate, therefore, as mentioned by the Constitution, has the right to run for this office, we believe that this motion should fail. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition very much for his remarks. The House now recognizes a member of the government to continue the case for the government bend.
Can you hear me all right? Jake Campbell. A rather little-known fact that has not yet been mentioned in this debate is that we very likely owe our existence as a nation to this very same political competency we're advocating for on the Gov side. In 1798, the U.S. was on the brink of war with France, a country with armed forces much more powerful than the U.S.'s. A majority of Americans, as well as most in Congress, demanded a swift and resolute declaration of war. But President John Adams, who had held a multitude of political positions before the presidency, knew better. He resisted the rash impulsiveness of the American masses because he had gained wisdom and good counsel from his experience, and, although he knew it would make him extremely unpopular, he withstood this raw sentiment and ultimately avoided war. Had it been for nearly any other president, this nation would have been plunged into a war it was not prepared for, and most likely would have lost disastrously. And it is because the principle of executive competency has saved us before that we advocate for this principle. Now, the PM is right in that the presidency, the office itself, has evolved to epic proportions over the years. From the Civil War to FDR's enlarging of executive power via the New Deal, it has changed. It is not the office it once was, and therefore demands a new, distinct, different set of qualifications.
Yes. What is your metric for political competency? Is the worth of a politician not the support of the people that are backing him?
We believe that those should both come into play, and of course, you have these people who have had office as a qualification, and the people will choose which one they like. We think it's perfectly compatible with the democratic process. Now, people without previous experience, we also agree, don't tend to have to depend on the mega cash from the outside, as they have exposure to the common people through governmental involvement. Whereas outsiders like you see in Donald Trump and Carly Fiorina have been involved in these special interest groups and are more dependent on it. No thank you. Now, career politicians are presented as being out of touch and alienated from the common people. But we contend that political experience necessitates having served constituents before, thus further acquainting one with voter interests in order to get in and stay in office. Now, they use the example of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Herbert Hoover as successful presidents. I wouldn't call Hoover successful. He was largely responsible for the Great Depression, the most miserable economic turmoil our country's experienced. Dwight D. Eisenhower's anti-communist foreign policy, which was very aggressive, likely escalated the Cold War, as opposed to somebody with more experience who very well may have steered us out of this, and the Cold War may not have even existed. No thank you. Now, the power of the presidency has grown to near unimagined proportions, and it must be viewed from a modern scope, taking into account the immense growth of the powers of the presidency and the great powers the president yields in preserving peace. Just as we don't give the CEO position of a company to Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo off the street, why relax the rule that someone be at least qualified to hold office for the highest office in the land? It makes no sense to downgrade this qualification. In such fragile, unpredictable times as ours, it's necessary that the most powerful individual on earth and commander-in-chief of the world's strongest armed forces be well-versed in international diplomacy as not to make rash decisions that put our people and national reputation at stake. You would seem to disagree?
Yes, first of all, President Obama was not well-versed in international diplomacy before running for president. Two, our constitution only declares that the conditions for anyone to run for president is that he is over 35 years of age and is a citizen of the country. A person who has a criminal record can run for president because our founding fathers believed that the people have the right to judge for themselves.
As we said, the qualifications, the office of the presidency itself in nature has changed immensely from the founding of the Constitution. Therefore, we believe that it should keep up with the times, has to better represent the people from a modern point of view. Now, military technology allows for distraction at literally the push of a button, i.e. the nuclear football. Now, putting the fate of the human race in one person's hands, the president, after all, can launch military action without having war declared. We haven't actually declared war since World War II. And the power of the presidency has been greatly enhanced, and allowing wars to be fought all but in name on the orders of one. This one person we must ensure is somebody like John Adams, who can withstand the tide of popular opinion and do what is best without being swayed by a lack of experience. No thank you. Less exposure makes them ignorant to the deeper understanding of world affairs enabled by public service. A few of the inexperienced candidates in this presidential race has had their public slip-ups. Ben Carson's geographical blunders, Donald Trump and Carly Fiorina's provocative comment about how they would handle Russia in an aggressive manner. This makes us fear for the fate of our nation. Now, political experience also often necessitates compromise. We saw this with Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. These were experienced politicians who were not afraid to compromise and reach out across the aisle. And this compromise necessitates this, as you are used to working with people with diverging opinions. No thank you. Now, previous extra-governmental involvement in outside entities increases reliance on outside organizations like businesses, super PACs, unions, and private donors, i.e. special interest groups, to get elected. This would increase cronyism in government to allow people with no political experience to become president, and it would shift voting power away from the individual voter, especially after the Citizens United ruling, which legalized and greatly enhanced the powers of super PACs. Yes.
Yeah, rarely do I ever say debaters are wrong, but you are wrong. Trump has enough money to run on his own. He is not a crony to anyone.
With all of the people he has donated to expand his influence, he even admitted to having financed some of the campaigns of other people, including Hillary Clinton. I think the money he's given, he's going to expect something in return from these special interests who he's donated to. It gives him more power than the average person. We don't believe that's correct. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the president power to make certain appointments, and these appointments will undoubtedly reflect their experience and perhaps their cronyism. We see this even in the case of President Obama, when special interest groups like Citigroup, whose executives had provided extensive donations to his campaign, somehow get two of their employees, Tim Geithner and Jack Lew, named Secretary of the Treasury by Mr. Obama. We also see this in the federal favors to Comcast ensuing after their large-scale donations to the Obama campaign. And this will be even worse with candidates without any political credibility or experience, and with previous involvement in these very corporations and having donated to them, instead of staying within the political sphere in which they get exposure just through their political experience. Now, because we very likely owe our continued independence as a nation to the political competency displayed by John Adams, for one, whose extensive political experience instilled in him the knowledge that the virtues of calm and restraint in the face of danger do well, we urge a government vote.
I thank the member of the government very much for his remarks, and the House now recognizes a member of the opposition to continue the case to the opposition bench. And again, if you would introduce yourself.
Camden Miracle. Thank you very much. Before I tear them down, I want to extend a very significant amount of respect to our opponents from USC and Pepperdine. It's a very scary thing to debate against an internationally recognized debate team. You guys are doing okay so far. So far. What I want to talk to you about very quickly is the value that Brittany and I are going to bring to you. And that is the value of character of presidency. We're going to give you two reasons for why this is paramount in the round. First, we're going to talk about why character is the most important value in a president, very simply. And secondly, we're going to tell you about the candidates and what they bring to the table when they have not held political office. We'll distinguish ourselves from UCLA clearly in those arguments. But before we do, let us take care of some housekeeping. We will begin with the government side as a whole. They seem to believe that ethos, or one's credibility, is the only thing that matters in a presidential election. We would contend that pathos, the emotional capability of a candidate to connect to every voter, is equally important. We'll start with their first argument, 1798 in France. We have two responses to this. First of all, this is not 1798. The president has a multiplicity of advisors, as UCLA very smartly brought up. The same thing applies to the current offices that are engaged. You have the ability to pick your advisors, to pick your generals, etc., etc. Secondly, we think that we can go back and forth on examples all day. Let's not get caught off on whether Hoover was a good president. What we're going to talk to you largely about are the principles behind these arguments. Let's get on to their second argument. The modern scope of power of the president and how he is the most powerful man in the world, we have three responses to this. First of all, as I already said, there are numerous advisors. We think there's going to be an adequate amount of experience in the office regardless. But secondly, we gave you examples of how directors of NGOs in developing countries, or even generals who have a military background, are often more qualified than a mayor of a state or a governor of a state to make these decisions. So perhaps they could clarify to me how being governor of a state prepares one to put troops on the ground. It does not. Any of the office experience they claim to be so essential does not prepare an individual for the powers of the office they just illustrated to you. And now their last argument. They dislike the fact that money can buy power. Well, we have two responses to this. This happens in either world, man. Like, in our world and in your world, money will buy power. Let's fix this with tighter FEC regulations instead of excluding a large populace from running for president. But secondly, we think that it's less likely when the candidate isn't in the world of politics for them to be able to be bought by power, when they are both empathetic and sympathetic to the people of the American populace, when they understand what it means to come from nothing. This is important. Let's talk about the value and what's most important to voters. And we think that's the character of the candidate. We think that voters want to believe in the character and identity, their values, the background of the candidate, because it is those experiences that assure voters that the candidate understands their own struggle and can help them achieve their hopes and dreams. Now, UCLA talked about the candidate being able to take actions in office. We want to talk about what the candidates stand for. Hashtag Kanye 2020. But before I go on, go ahead.
What if the candidate doesn't even exist? For example, when these nuts came up on the presidential candidacy, it got 9% of the presidential poll. Are we going to have these nuts as a president?
What this shows is a dissatisfaction in the American system. What this shows is that people are voting and wanting to look towards Trump because he does things differently. Let's have those voices stand up. So let's talk about the first argument, why character is the most important quality. Let's understand that people do recognize experience, but they vote on character. It is that quality that sometimes you can't describe, that quality you can only feel in your gut. When you look at a man or woman and believe in them, not just because of their resume, but because they understand what it's like to come from nothing, what it's like to suffer, what it's like to triumph against all odds. And make no mistake, the candidates that would be excluded and affected by this policy have triumphed against all odds. To have gained enough momentum and support to run for president without having the influence that office affords is incredible. Recognize that they will have experienced advisors. This is not the debate to be had. Now, the ability to do things differently from the rest is valuable. Our society wants those emerging voices, wants those people who do things differently. Say what you will about Trump, but he has goddamn determination. Now, the person who has succeeded in the 21st century without experience is not someone to be easily discounted. This policy rules out those potential candidates, those people that the American populace identify with. Saying that political experience isn't necessary to have good character is what we bring to you. Let us move on to the second argument. Why the qualities that the potential candidate bring are so important. We're going to examine this in three separate lenses. First, the honesty of the candidate. Second, their unique narratives that they bring to the table. And lastly, how we value every person's vote. Let's begin with honesty. Because we think that when candidates do not come from political backgrounds, they are not tethered by the typical ties that candidates have. USC proved this to us by talking about the political wheeling and dealing that you get from political experience. The candidates that would be excluded by this policy aren't beholden to those same tethers. They aren't beholden to the funding that goes into their campaigns to be re-elected in their state every year. They don't have to alter their voices to appease their political authorities and parties. If it's under 15 seconds, please go ahead.
Sure, good wit. I like the wit. One question that I do want to ask is, how are you so certain that your position advocates for people that have such great personality and have great advocacy and ethos and pathos that allows for your position to take on the role it does?
Because we don't exclude them. It's that simple. If those people do exist, the American populace will fall behind them. They will gain momentum and we'll see them rise up just like Trump has. That's the line. Now, let's move on. We think there's also a second lens we can examine this with. The unique narratives of the candidates that would be excluded. This is time for honesty now. Let's be honest with ourselves. Most elected officials right now in America are older white males with traditional values. This policy that they propose makes it so that only those group of people can run for presidency. Now, let me save you the trouble of having to imagine that world. It's god-awful. In Europe, they have quotas for placing women in office. They have sweeping social policies that benefit children more than we do in America. They have more programs that aid minorities and women. Our point is that a true multiplicity benefits the American populace the most. But lastly, why we value every person's vote. The reason we're having this debate, and I brought this up with my question, is because this side inherently believes that if an unqualified candidate makes it to the ballot, the people of America would somehow make the wrong decision. Now let me be clear with you. It's very easy for us college students sitting atop our ivory tower in California to pass judgment on those convictions that may exist in rural America. UCLA talked about democracy being important. We tell you why variety is key to that democracy. Brittany and I firmly believe in every American's ability and right to vote, and that in the way that they will feel best bring their hopes and dreams into actualization. Now, if that candidate hasn't held office, if that person they believe in hasn't held an elected position, who cares? We will always continue to rise and fight for every American's hope and dreams. God bless America, God bless Laverne.
I thank the member of the opposition very much for his remarks. The House is pleased to recognize the government whip to summarize the debate for the government side, and if you would introduce yourself.
Lila Eleche. Thank you for a very great speech. It's a little ironic how someone that's arguing for not having credentials in office also brings up credentials of schools in this debate. Regardless, the political landscape in the United States has changed, definitely. There have been fundamental changes that we have seen that have been different from what our founding fathers have envisioned, but also different in that we are seeing candidates like Trump, whether our votes are in unison with like what he says or what he doesn't. There are candidates now that sort of reflect upon the dissatisfaction that Americans feel in the political field. However, I do think that there is a clear a connection to be made here that requires some clarity. To hold office, especially if we're talking about presidential offices, requires some sort of political experience, and that is what we argue as the government bench, just because that necessitates a very strong role. It is undeniable that being commander-in-chief and being president of the United States does not have serious implications, would be false. As we face current threats, no thank you, not at this time. As we face current threats and our political arena is growingly changing, when we see threats like ISIS arise, I don't think that it is quite reasonable to assume that someone that has not held political office is very well qualified to serve under these circumstances. We are not saying that there is a 100% accuracy with someone who has held political office to make wise decisions. In fact, I think that that dichotomy that is created between smart and dumb choices is not the correct one. We think there are better sources that can be provided when you do have political office. Yeah.
How does me, being governor of Wisconsin, the cheese state, prepare me for these harsh implications in any degree?
Like I said, it does not provide 100% accuracy rate, but you, not having any position, would not know actually how to interact with your constituents or know what the people want. But regardless, I think that having those implications in mind is a very important one to elaborate on who should, in fact, win this debate. But I also think that, to summarize the government's bench here, there are, yeah?
Yes, now, if you believe that the most important thing is a political office, why are you limiting it to people that have been elected? What about the Secretary of State? What about the Secretary of Defense? Are these not political offices that are just as important as elected ones?
No one's arguing for superiority or hierarchy here of elected offices being better than another. I'm just saying if you are going to be in charge of the United States as a nation and going to be commander-in-chief, you should have some knowledge and some background that allows you to make wise decisions when we face foreign threats and domestic threats alike. Important here to note is that there are future implications whether we like it or not. We set a precedent for other countries to follow, and I think that is what the government bench tries to argue when they say having held elected office is important because we as the United States have a precedence that we set to other countries, whether we like to admit it or not. I believe that mixing the political arena with any other arena of life is actually a wrong move, not because that does not mean we are a democracy and other people's voices don't count in that vote, but also because we set a precedent for how other developing countries also function and how we set a precedent exactly. Yes, I'll take your question.
The vast majority of politicians today have had experience before they become president. A lot of those individuals have also done some pretty big screw-ups, i.e., I don't know, Afghanistan a few years back. Explain to me how this would be any better.
Right, okay, the big screw-ups that you're talking about also apply to people that have not had presidential offices. Like Donald Trump telling all the Mexicans to go to Mexico is a big problem. Sorry. So I think regardless, we are going to have some wise people and some probably not well-equipped people to run the political arena. That is, again, not something that we are advocating for. We don't say we have 100% solvency on the government bench. What we say is we have better people that are equipped with better decisions to make when it comes to the nation. Like I was talking about, though, about the future implications of the nation, the United States, again, sets a precedent for what is acceptable and what is not. If we have people like Donald Trump be the face of America, I'm sorry, but that is definitely going to cause some serious backlash, especially with how we react to things like ISIS and things like the European refugee crisis, or how we interact with human beings just on a general basis, one-on-one. Yeah. So I think what the government bench here tries to argue is that there is a level of nuance that is missing from the opposition bench. They do have some good arguments they bring up about it being a democratic nation. However, I don't think that's exclusive from the government's arguments. We still advocate for a democracy, right? We are not saying that our role eliminates any sort of democratic notion of the United States just because we have a requirement. It would just be another requirement on top of the already required requirements that are set right now. There are requirements to be president of the nation currently, right? That does not eliminate the fact that we are a democratic nation. In fact, we just say that we have a better, wise decision when we add this other requirement.
Democracy is inclusion, not exclusion.
Right, we also have rules right now who can be president, so it's still inclusion, sir. Okay. Also talking about how we set this precedent. Precedent allows us to have a better engaged background on what it means to lead constituents. I believe what the opposition argues inevitably leads to cognitive dissonance, where you have people that are ill-equipped, to lead the country. Not because having political office is some sort of iron tool that we have that is like, oh, look at this magnificent trophy. Not that in itself provides better qualifications, but that provides a step which bridges the gap that we do not have people that do not know the interests of the constituents and the constituency base that hold offices that require us to make very important decisions. Again, like the government bench has argued, things like nuclear war can happen very quickly, and fight against ISIS. I guess that's decisions that we should have people that held political office should make those decisions. Thank you.
Thank the speaker very much for her remarks. Now, please recognize the final speaker of the debate to summarize the side of the opposition as well as today's first debate, the opposition bill.
In order to be able to change a standard of what it takes to be, as the government side said, the most powerful person, probably not just in the United States, but the entire world, you better have better reasons than we're just adding another requirement. The opposition has failed to hear, coming from side government, other than saying that Donald Trump may run and that's pretty bad. I think we need more justification when implementing such a policy, such a new rule, and I'm going to explain while the government arguments were convincing, they weren't convincing enough compared to the opposition, particularly my partner and I. Let me go over my 2 points of crystallization so that everybody understands the round. The first is going to be, what is best for politics in a democracy? We are talking about democracy. It didn't sound like it much from side government. And the second point is going to be, what is best for the individuals that live in that society? Because all of us would be affected from this policy. And that's pretty scary, and I'll explain to you the implications of this. But before I do, let me go into some direct refutation out of what we heard on the last speaker. We hear something very similar coming from each and every speaker on side government to the status quo. Because the status quo, the vast majority of presidents have had the experience that they talk to you about. If you are changing a policy, there needs to be some sort of precedence, some sort of examples as to where this policy would work. And instead, the only arguments we heard is that Donald Trump says that he wants all the Mexicans back to Mexico. Well, let me tell you something about how political behavior works. Political behavior has told us that if the Republican Party does not start becoming more inclusive of different minority groups, particularly Mexican Americans, they most certainly are not going to be voted in. So fear not, he will not be president. That's not the concern. But what we do believe the concern is today is all of the potential voices that will not be heard. All the potential candidates that they are excluding because we may have one bad seed because of some arbitrary standard we heard coming from 4 speakers. We think this is a problem. We overall heard how the U.S. sets precedents and how we need to be able to show them that we have qualified individuals. Again, I don't see the uniqueness of this, right? We have precedents right now. The United States was a laughing stock for quite a long time when we sent in thousands and thousands of troops a few years back. This was with somebody that had political experience. If you are going to change something, you damn well better have examples of how it works. We have not heard so. We think more harms come from it. Overall, she ended with saying that these individuals don't know how to answer to the people that are voting and their desires. Yes, they do. They're getting voted in. And if they don't know that, they won't get voted in, and all of your arguments do not stand, fear not. So either they are answering to them or they're not. We think overall the status quo answers best for this. Now let's go in, what is best for politics and democracy? The government tells you that being involved in politics before is a necessary condition. A necessary condition saying that because you happen to be the governor of a certain state and you dealt with, I guess, getting voted in, that somehow you were able to handle all of the really intense decisions that side government told you, like sending individuals to war. My partner begged the question multiple times, what does it mean, or what are the qualifications of somebody that were governor of the cheese state, love the state, but what does this person mean when they have to decide to send troops into Iraq? And there was no answer to this. We think in order to be able to change the democratic system that exists today, there needs to be answers to this. Because it's not just easy in saying, well, there already exist requirements. So let's have the very government that's in power right now decide who further can be inside of government. The very people we all have problems with, and we're furthering that by saying you have to be already entrenched in that system. We think that's a problem, particularly on our side of the house, because nothing changes then. They are all held to the same type of corporations, to the same type of deals that exist then, and overall we think that you're not solving. Go ahead.
Yeah, how does a candidate who doesn't have millions and millions of dollars of celebrity status get visibility except in public office?
How does this happen whether or not with your plan? You have to be able to have the money to begin with. That's a problem that exists regardless, and my partner said we need to have stricter regulations. Hell, take away Citizens United, we're perfectly fine with that. That's not changing status quo, right? We think we need to talk about this debate. Overall, my partner gives to you examples about how in Europe we see policies that benefit men and women. Why is this? Because you have quotas, you have women that are prime ministers. What does this have to do with this? Because you're not having that traditional white male, I'm so sorry to all of you, but you're not having the traditional white male that are making these regulations, that are making the laws. You are having different individuals, the very individuals that the people's voices that exist in that democracy want to have favor them. That only can exist and only can change on our side. We think overall having the honesty, having the ability to be able to change can only happen when you allow for all of the voices to be heard. But let's go on to the second point of crystallization, something that all of us spoke about. The individuals. We heard coming from opening opposition, which we do support on our side, we think that they do deserve the right to be able to choose. My partner and I explained to you why they deserve this right. And we think this is incredibly pertinent. Because you want somebody you're able to identify with. You want someone with character, and you want to be able to identify them on the 3 levels of persuasion, which is ethos, pathos, and logos. We think that coming from side government...
Debate, and please enjoy a 10-minute intermission while the judges deliberate. In the meantime, let's give our contestants a round of applause. Than when you were looking at the page. So I would just say you've got skills, and so I would get off the page a little bit further, more, because you actually are good debaters, but you're better debaters when you're off notes. So just that's a confidence issue. So very well done, and congratulations. Pepperdine and Laverne, I'm going to bring these together because this was kind of my favorite part. So you came out swinging, which threw your opponents off, which was fine, with the credentialing thing, and you knocked it down with your argument. And I thought that both very good debate strategy and both very good tactics and very quick on your feet. So congratulations, and very strong debate tactic. I mean, so good for you. Stylistically, in terms of personal preference, Mr. UCLA in the 3-piece suit, I really like that, and the closer, I think you cleaned house with you touched on every argument, specifically the counters and yours. I thought that was probably the strongest performance of tonight, which is you hit it.
I think just to, there's not much to add. Good job as chairman. You know, I agree on when you guys were extemporaneous, you were all very strong. One thing, you know, Hoover, I'm not sure exactly where I would use him as an example, but Taft, well, all right. And I think that the government might have established a little bit more specifically what the qualifications were, and not left it to the opposition to so easily counter that. And admittedly, I think emotionally, although we try to be neutral, I think that the opposition did have an emotional argument that's going to ring with the audience, with Americans a lot. So you did have a very difficult job. I think everybody did do a very good job tonight.
I'm impressed that you're up there doing this, and I'm just excited to be on this side of the table, judging in my life. One time I get to do it.
Okay, I've been stalking Clay all weekend. I've become Clay's stalker. And so Clay has not mentioned American Idol all weekend until we were there, and he mentioned Simon Cowell. So that's what. So I'm just saying.
I mentioned Simon Cowell because I might be
get ready because he just. I think this has been put out for a lot of years.
Yeah, I have. It's been up, yes. Let's see. Where do I want to start here? There are a few arguments that I think you missed on the government side. Wait, did I get that right? Not from y'all in the back. Hold on. From this side, I'm sorry. You know what, I'm going to start in here and do something else because I'm totally confused. Clearly, I wouldn't win up here myself. A few facts that I think were a little bit missed over here on this side, especially from USC. Mispronunciation of names, John Kasich instead of Case. Chris Christie as the moderator of the debate. I can't remember who said Chris Christie was the moderator of the debate at CNN. That Arnold Schwarzenegger could run for president, which he obviously couldn't, given that there are places in the Constitution that say you have to be a natural-born citizen. The argument about the governors not. Oh, thank you. You'd think I'd know how to use a microphone, wouldn't you? The argument about governors not having the experience over here, about governors not having the experience with troops on the ground. Governors certainly have the authority over National Guards in every single state, and that's something that you guys missed when you had the opportunity to dispute there. That Senate, even though you did make the point that that Congress has not actually declared war since World War II, which I thought was a really smart rebuttal, but Senate Foreign Affairs Committee chairmen obviously have those have powers to know stuff about foreign affairs. I'm going to admit that I'm the person who was the swing vote over here when it came to choosing in the rankings. Easy there, son.
And
I'm
going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why very frankly and very honestly. You had me up until you spoke at the podium. I really appreciated how really pointed some of your questions were, and I thought that it was a mistake that the government made, that they didn't respond as well to the questions that were posed as this side did. But when you think about how you debate outside of debate clubs in college, and the places that you do debate outside of debate clubs in college, and while there's certainly styles that you might use here, when you get out of school, the places you'll see this happen are either in the courtroom in front of a jury or a judge, or on the political stump in front of constituents or potential constituents. And you lost me. The cockiness doesn't play. The gamesmanship doesn't play. And it hurt you with me. And while I honestly believe you guys had really, really strong arguments, it turned me off right away. The little internationally renowned whatever, I don't care. And as a voter or as a jury member, I turn you off. And I turned you off right away. So I want you to remember your audience when you do that. And obviously you knew who your judges were going to be, and why would you think about it that much tonight? But when you're in front of a jury, or when you're in front of I think you all have a future in either politics or law. Every single one of you.
Don't do it.
You don't do either one.
I did both.
You all have a future and potential there for sure. But when you're doing that, remember who your audience is, and don't turn them off, and don't lose your argument because the style that you choose to use is offensive. So everybody, I thought, did. I was really impressed, and just really glad that I didn't have to be out there doing it myself.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Thanks to my fellow judges, Simon Cowell and I'm smart. And to all our wonderful teams and their coaches, and all of you for supporting collegiate debate. And with that, I will hand it off to the people that know what they're doing, and I want you to use these flags at 6 and 1 minute increments.
Yes, no, we had a wonderful debate tonight, and thank you all so much for coming out and supporting these wonderful students. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that when you look at some of the debates on television and you see that they maybe spoke for 10 minutes out of the course of the 2-hour debate, and you see these guys doing that in one sitting, just going up there, and it's really impressive. So let's give them some